So I'm happy now to introduce the second feature in what, at least in the States, we would call a double feature. Do they have double features here too?
They don't anymore in the States either. Only in art houses.
That's true. You just have to sneak from one theater to the other.
Good luck.
So welcome to phase 2 of today's series of talks. How to introduce Ted Nelson. This is no easy task because the person and even the myth is larger than life. So I'll just do so a little bit personally in the sense that I tend to keep late hours here. So I usually know that it's gotten really late when Ted shows up. So right around midnight, 12:30 a.m., there's a cheerful hello from next door, and it's Ted coming in to work. And Ted's work reaches into so many corners of the web and in some ways can't be contained by it. And I think part of what he's likely to talk about is how the current structures we have are indeed too limiting, and that pushing outside that envelope and seeing what the space is on the other side of the universe's expansion is in essence what Ted wants to show us. So I believe this man is a genius, and I am very interested to hear what he has to say. So with no further ado, Ted Nelson.
Wow. Thanks, gentlemen. So this will be a lightweight talk. This is maybe at the end. I'm going to talk about various political, historical events inside quote technology. Partly because so many people I meet think that technology is immutable and objective. And that is precisely the myth that that the laymen fall for. But really, of course, inside the internet community where they build these things, we know how very rapidly changeable it all is. So I have a number of slogans. Quote, "Those who enjoy sausage and respect the law should not inquire into how either is made." I don't. This is a very old quotation. I don't know who it's from. In other words, anonymous. But the point is that today's internet software and applications. I'm not talking about the infrastructure now, but I'm talking about the stuff we look at and use daily. Has accreted in a number of technical fights, following and conquering different people's agendas, and in order to understand it, it's probably more important to understand that as a starting point than to try to understand what it is. It's like the borderlines of Wales. Well, I guess that's probably fairly well defined. The borderline of the state of Pennsylvania, which makes no sense at all except for historic and political reasons. And so it is with much of our software today. Now, to put this in perspective, let's talk about some old technological controversies. Here is a great man. I just got a big picture of him. Where'd I put it? Down here somewhere. Yes. Yeah. So this is Isambard Kingdom Brunel, one of the great engineers of all time, British. His father dug the first, I believe, underwater railroad tube under the Thames. His father's from France, but Brunel was, of course, British. And we see him here before the chains of his mighty ship, the Great Eastern, the biggest ship ever built. And Brunel is famous for two main things: iron bridges and iron ships, both of which were innovations. It was obvious to everyone that an iron ship could not possibly float, and thus Brunel, using simple physics, went against knowledge and proceeded to create modern shipping. But he had a very important point about railroads. And it's right here in Wikipedia. Oh, wrong page. Brunel made the controversial choice for the railroad he built in the West, the Great Western, of 7 feet, 0.25 inches for the width of the tracks, the distance between the rails. even though almost all British railways to date had used a gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. Brunel said this was nothing more than a carryover from the mine railways that George Stevens had built. This was true, and probably before that, from the width of the Roman chariot. The Roman chariots had a standard width. As they rattled along the old asphalt roads that the Romans built, grooves were created. It behooved a chariot to have the same width axle as the grooves, or else the wheels would fall off more quickly, thus standardization. And so this standard then devolved to Britain at the dawn of the age of steam. Brunel was right. The wider the tracks, the faster the trains can go, and the safer they will be. Who won? The Royal Commission, headed by Charles Babbage, at least Wendy Hall told me that, headed by Charles Babbage, endorsed Brunel's system, and he lost. And so now throughout the world, we have more dangerous railways because Brunel was overruled and everyone followed the British gauge, approximately. Of course, when you go from Finland to Russia, they have to take the trains off the tracks because Russia Stalin very carefully made sure that no one could invade by railroad. Okay, that's one example of technological agendas. The carriage makers wanted to use their standard jigs and tools. Brunel wanted to make it safer. Brunel lost. Another example, a very important one of the greatest men of all time, whom some of you may not have heard of, Nikola Tesla, the inventor of the modern world. He is given credit on the US stamp for the Tesla coil, a mere bagatelle. He invented basically the entire system of electrical grids as we now know them. While walking at dusk in the town of Sarajevo with his friend, he noted the lengthening shadows, and at once there came to him a vision. He was studying electrical engineering, of alternating current generated by huge turbines, which, because it was alternating, could travel great distances. And he envisioned cities with electric lights. Later, he was to discover fluorescent lighting. I mean, this is all arguable, but I'll tell you what is mentioned in Wikipedia, and you can worry about it for yourself. Radar, radio, of course. His patents antedated those of Marconi, and while he was beaten in court during his lifetime, his patent was eventually upheld, making him the true inventor of radio. He invented radio control. He invented the guided missile. He died a pauper. He went from Yugoslavia, or whatever it was called then, Serbia, to the United States, worked briefly for Edison. They had a falling out. Edison said, if you make this improvement, I'll give you $50,000. Tesla made the improvement, asked for the $50,000. Edison said it was a joke. Tesla quit on the spot. Tesla then, by and by, worked as a laborer for a time, managed to get financing from George Westinghouse and built the great generator, the turbine at Niagara Falls, which I believe is still functioning today, demonstrating conclusively that Edison was absolutely wrong because Edison wanted direct current, which goes about a mile. Edison's plan was to build a coal-fired electrical generating plant every mile. Today, well, some people worry about radiation hurting their brains, but in any case, a great deal of electricity is transmitted over great distances through alternating current on those high wires we see everywhere. Tesla's great dream, and here we get, well, first clash of agendas, Edison versus Tesla, alternating versus direct current. But now we come to Tesla's great dream. Tesla wanted to give free electricity to everyone in the world. And how did he plan to do it? This is not on Wikipedia. This isn't a book I leafed through and hope to buy when I find it again, unless I can find it on the web. which gives the details, claiming to fill in what some people say they don't know of what Tesla was doing. Basically, Tesla's plan was to build generators which would charge up the electrical field of the planet, which would hold more and more juice, so that anybody with a coil, the right wavelength, I believe it's 150 kilohertz, anyone with a coil could just tap as much as they liked. When Westinghouse understood this, he stopped backing Tesla. And you can justifiably ask, what's the business model? Because if this works, and it's entirely possible that it may be workable, you can charge up the Earth's magnetic field with as much energy as you choose, and anybody anywhere in the world can tap it off with a coil of the right frequency. Now, what's the business model? Because if anybody can take your electricity, you're going to be wasting it charging up the Earth. Tesla built 2 great towers, one in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Lightning was seen to come crashing down on it during his experiments. Then he went bust, I think. Then he got more financing and built another great tower on Long Island. And the lightning, I don't know about the lightning there, but in any case, the point was these towers had to be fairly tall and well insulated because there couldn't be any ground conduction to carry the electricity away. It had to go into the, you mustn't say ether, it had to go into the electromagnetic field. But then, you know, this is a wonderful question for MBA students. Can you find a business model here? Somebody, at a recent talk I gave, somebody suggested, well, you could advertise on it. Anyway, so Tesla versus Westinghouse. What's the agenda? Tesla's great agenda unrealized. As far as I know, you can do it today. You can start charging up the Earth's magnetic field. Of course, who knows? The black helicopters might arrive. Let's not go there. In any case, that's a key story. Now, here's a very interesting one which I have not been able to verify. Okay, so that makes it more fun. Wernher von Braun versus Jaeger. We all know the phrase, pop-up bilge, named after Bill. Okay, so here's Chuck Yeager. Oh, yeah, Chuck Yeager. Hello. Yeah, Chuck Yeager. When I was 15, I saw the most thrilling movie of my life. One of them. If I tell this story, I'll cry. Oh, well. It's called Breaking the Sound Barrier, a British film, telling how a spirited, brave young designer, young aircraft designer, British, well-to-do, builds himself an airplane, tries to fly it. Actually, he builds several of them. He builds 3. Tries to fly it faster than sound. Of course, he delegates this to a pilot. The pilot goes up. He says, okay, approaching Mach 1, buffeting, and the thing starts to shake. And now, she's nosing down. I'm pulling the stick back, and she keeps nosing down. Well, we've got 2 more planes. 1 more pilot. So the second pilot goes up. Very well, we're nosing in now, going up to Mach 1, approaching Mach 1. Here it comes, buffeting. She's nosing down. Pulling a stick back, keeps nosing down.
We're not crying yet, Ted, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Maybe not. Maybe we can get through this without that. So there's nothing for it, but I've got to go up in the third one. No, Jack, no, you mustn't. No, men must do what men must do. Approaching Mach 1, buffeting. She's nosing down. I dare not pull the stick back. I'm going to push the stick forward. And he breaks the sound barrier by pushing the stick forward against all intuition. Thank you. Who really broke the sound barrier? I was alarmed to find out sometime later it was this man. Chuck Yeager in the rocket ship X-1, 1947, dropped from the belly of B-29. He's famous for having the right stuff. The first person to become a World War II ace in one day when he shot down 5 planes. A great fighter pilot, then a great test pilot, and 2 days before flying the X-1, he fell off a horse and broke 2 ribs. But he had the right stuff. Did he tell anybody? No! He wangled a broomstick from a friend so he could close the cockpit door despite the pain. It's true. And then he went to Mach 1. And he later said, hell, if I'd pushed the stick forward, I'd be dead. So that whole myth propagated by that charming film is absurd. Now, here's the point. Yeager later said, and I have not been able to confirm this, but I have it from a close friend whom I trust, who is a rocket scientist. Yeager said later, I could have gone orbital, but they told me not to. Why would that be? When did anybody go orbital? The first orbital shot, I believe, was in 1957 with Sputnik, which means, by the way, fellow traveler. And then we hastily put an old V2 into commission to fire up another. The U.S. got its own satellite up, and then the space race continued with Yuri Gagarin being the first man to fly in space. He was told, I'm so glad you made it. I think it was stuck on the M1 with accidents from the cold. So they told Gagarin that there was a bomb under his seat and that if he landed anywhere but in Soviet territory, they would blow him up. However, his boss whispered as he got on the plane, we've disarmed the bomb. Good luck. Anyhow, then, so the space race went on. But we didn't get a man in space till John Glenn. We didn't have a man go orbital till John Glenn. How come when we could have done it in 47? And I believe this is the answer. Werner von Braun, who, unbeknownst to most people, ran the U.S. space program. There's a film called, I didn't know this till the film called Moonwalk 1, which they had this great shot, you know, the rocket going up and the ice falling off and the gantry disconnecting. And then the pictures of all the guys at Houston Mission Control. You know, Houston Mission Control, all the guys sitting at TVs, really interesting. And the camera turns. And there, the top podium, is the man the USA did not show to the public, Werner von Braun. Why didn't they let Yeager go orbital? Because von Braun, already in charge of the space program, had decreed big rockets, multi-stage rockets. And if we let a little plane go orbital, it will derail his entire political agenda. Now, von Braun, in turn, had a political agenda based, of course, I'm digressing, but I can't help it. Von Braun had a political agenda not based on, but in tune with that of Robert A. Heinlein. Those of us who grew up in the golden age of science fiction had one dream, and that was to get into space. To get into space and to live there. Today's NASA is a bureaucracy with no interest whatever in colonizing space. What they want to do is send off unmanned scientific missions and get their pensions. Jerry Pournelle, the science fiction writer, told me that he was once on a TV interview show with the head of NASA. And Pournelle mentioned wanting to live in space, and the head of NASA reacted as if in total astonishment, saying, nobody wants to live in space. And Pournelle said, are you nuts? And he says to the cameraman, would you go to space if you had the chance to live in space? The cameraman says, absolutely. That was an ad lib. But the point is, This has been the dream of many, and there are many who would give their lives on this experiment. Just to live in space for a month and die, they'd be willing. Because the Heinlein's dream was that's where freedom would lie. That is where freedom would lie. And the entire generation of libertarians in the United States is essentially based not just on Ayn Rand, but on Robert Heinlein. Okay, so now here's Wernher von Braun, who has the same agenda. He wanted to colonize space, I believe. And in fact, he was nearly killed by Hitler. I mean, we don't like the fact that he made the V-2 rocket that was bombing London. And nicely misguided by a few key signals that I guess the BBC put up to misguide it. But he really wanted to get into space, and when the SS found this out, he was arrested and he was about to be shot. But wiser heads prevailed, at least from the Nazi point of view, and so he continued with the space program. When it was clear the Germans, here he was at Peenemünde on the Baltic coast, with the Russians coming from the north and the Americans coming from the south. Which would you choose? He hijacked a train with all his guys on it, and delivered them, surrendered to an army private. So he very soon was the head of the secret American space program, which then gradually became NASA. But temporarily secret, and he took over all the V2s, and they were rechristened Redstone. So okay, away from that, so the agenda here that apparently kept Chuck Yeager from going orbital in 1947 was that the U.S., that von Braun was already in charge with his multi-stage rocket agenda. Now, again, that is partly conjectural, but it's a good story, and I want to find out if it's true. Okay, so all of this is background for computers. The point being that there are hidden agendas, hidden decisions in most technological choices. Fluoridation of water, which is a big political issue in the United States. What will turn out to be a political issue, such as the fluoridation of water, we don't know, or we don't always know, because it certainly didn't seem political to the people who tried to create it. I will now show a couple little things. Yeah. So, let's put that into this one. Sorry. Different. Everyone is different, aren't they? Right. Okay. So here is an idiotic restriction by the program I use, Eudora. So it says nicknames cannot contain leading or trailing spaces or a comma. I tried, put in as an example, John the Piper's Son. Okay. Now, here's another one. This is my favorite. This is my favorite. We are sorry. Your registration cannot be completed due to the following. Registrant, invalid phone number. Please remove any non-numerical characters, such as hyphens, parentheses, and letters. Why? The computer requires it. No. It is one line of regular expression for the programmer to remove any hyphen, spaces, and whatnot to make the data conformant to what he wants to receive. This is simply put there. Well, what is the real technical reason it is put there? Answer. The programmer is a jerk. The programmer is a passive-aggressive, domineering jerk who wants the user to do things in some way he considers rigorous, which is total bullshit. Now, why do I mention this? Because it's all over the industry. This is just the most egregious example. Throughout the world, there are decisions which are sometimes passive-aggressive in this case, which are idiotic. My favorite was when I got on an airplane. It had, this was the first time I'd seen on an airplane that had a screen, a little screen, and a remote. Oh boy, games. Okay, I'll try that. First question. How many hours do you want to play? What kind of a moron would ask that question? What gibbering ninny would suppose that you could know how long you wanted to play unless you'd seen the game? So this shows the techie mentality at its worst. Now, it's not right to malign any ethnic group, but are techies an ethnic group? The techies include some of the most wonderful, warm, knowledgeable, fine writers I have ever known. On the other hand, that's not the average. On the average, they are less able to understand human psychology and less able to comprehend what is wanted. When you have something programmed, I have many notes for a book, which I may or may not have time to write, called Fighting with Programmers. The point is that when you want something programmed, you explain exactly what you want, and then they go away and do something else. Now you have a dialogue, and then they go away and do something else. And I've been through this cycle many times. It's quite reliable, even with people you really like, respect, and enjoy. So it is intrinsic to the territory. My half-brother Dan, who is among other things, a contractor, a real estate fellow, once said to me, "Why don't programmers do what you ask?" And I said, "Dan, it's like contractors." He said, "Say no more, I understand." You have to watch them like a hawk. But you see, no contractor who ever worked on a building was able to put in a feature where on Thursdays the porch would turn itself up and down, upside down, and fly away. Whereas in software, this is entirely possible. Unimaginably strange features can be put in, often as intended creative extensions, which are not always wrong. Burrell Smith of the Macintosh project, the original Macintosh project, for example, told me that Steve Jobs absolutely forbade any additional signal lines on the bus. They hid one. And only because they hid it was it possible later to expand the Macintosh. So sometimes they're right, on the average not. All of this said, let us to look at a few cases of agenda. Oh yes, a couple of other quotes. As to techies, quote, "War is too important to be left to the generals," Georges Clemenceau. Meaning that software isn't too important for human life to allow the decisions to be made by those with a purely technical viewpoint. They need an overarching vision. And I claim, we could discuss this, that software is a branch of movie making, and what is desperately needed for good software is a director. The reason that video games are so much better, computer games are so much better than office software is, A, that the people who create computer games love to play computer games, whereas the people who do office software don't give a shit. And the people who create video games, computer games, have discovered the director. So in this respect, the software world is like movies before 1905. Before 1905, the job of making a movie was given to the cameraman because he understood the equipment. And that's roughly how it is with the world, with software today. Even for web pages, the job of creating web pages is given to the technical guy who understands XML, whatever the hell they've chosen to use, rather than someone who understands the effect it will have on the heart and mind of the viewer when they see it. And that is why websites are so difficult to find your way around it. Look at the prize-winning website of the BBC. Pretty. Can you find your way around it? I don't know. I'm still trying to find that. They had a wonderful Shakespearean-style play, transcription of one of the great. What's the one about the Greek women who won't sleep with their husbands? Lysistrata. A wonderful Lysistrata in Shakespearean iambs that they broadcast within the last 2 months, and they say, search our site. I can't find it. I want to hear the whole thing. Okay, last quotation. Today's computer world is based on techie misunderstandings of human thought and human life. That I will stick by because I said it. this is the firmest statement. In other words, the entire interface we see on the computer today, that's one of the things we'll talk about in what time we have, it was created by a bunch of technical guys who had their own agenda in mind, which is not basically what we ought to have. Okay, now let's go, and I'm going to ask. Who would like to hand out pages? Thank you very much. Okay, yeah. So there's page 1 and page 2. We've already finished with page 1, but I'm giving it to you for the sake of completeness. Now to page 2. Oh, give me page 2. Thanks. That's all right. All right.
Page 2 starts at the back.
All right. So I'll wing it. We're going to talk about this man. So I want to talk about this guy. Douglas Engelbart. He spoke here last June. Was anyone here when Doug spoke last June? 1, 2, 4. Yeah. Okay. So it was wonderful, but he spoke very faintly and he was rather sickly seeming. He was. In fact, we went to lunch and then he realized he couldn't have lunch, and I took him to the hospital with pneumonia. And so he was here. He was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days, and then he stayed at our house for 2 weeks. So while it was unfortunate, it was wonderful as an experience to have Doug Engelbart to come home to, and we did talk out quite a few things. So Doug essentially is the founder, as Tesla was the unknown founder of today's electrical world. Doug is in a way the unknown founder of today's computer world. I strongly recommend. I think it's on that sheet. Did you get a page for me? Doug page, thanks. Yeah, down here at the, in the middle, there's a little box that says, see the video at unrev.org. It's cut into short pieces, but it is the video of his great demo. So Doug, as a young man in the Pacific, reads the classic article, As We May Think by Van Nevar Bush, and I won't take time to talk about that, which also inspired me to do Gary. And in 57, he said, the world is in great danger. Problems are escalating in complexity. We must have solutions that escalate in their power. So somehow, some way, I'm going to make things better by giving the human mind and human work groups things that will increase their ability to work together. He gradually got funding. I didn't have time to check a lot of stuff here. He gradually got funding, and at the Stanford Research Institute, not to be confused with Stanford University, in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, he built the NLS, or online system. Now, there are a lot of alumni of Engelbart's lab who are illustrious. I visited there in '67. I interviewed for a job, and I saw the mouse at that time. Up to then, I thought it would be light pens, and wow, this mouse thing is great. So I immediately became loyal to the mouse. But Doug never thought that was worth a damn. He invented it on a weekend. The point was his extraordinary system for cooperative work based upon telephone connections if necessary, based upon video connections if necessary, all demonstrated in his great 1968 show, and based upon his language. I don't remember the name of the language itself, but NLS was the name of the system. So the high point was the fall of 1968, where from his Menlo Park facility on TV, Jeff Rulifson and others sat at screens, videoed to Doug's live demo. I could actually pull it up, but we don't have time. Doug's live demo showing interactive text editing, which almost no one had ever seen, showing interactive text editing, interacting with the other person, and sharing work on a screen. So the notion of groupware, of shared work, all comes from him. Doug has gone into hard times, loss of funding, the fact that digital equipment pulled the rug out from the computer on which he'd built everything, and the vast cost of switching was not available. And a firm called Timeshare offered the NLS system for a time, but whether it was due to bad salesmanship or the intrinsic difficulty of the system, no one knows. There's a great controversy. Now, Doug, you see, had a mouse and a key set. On the key set, each finger press down a separate key. Now that sounds complicated, but in fact, it's just the ASCII alphabet, if you happen to know. It's numerical counting in binary. A, B, C, D, E, F. Anyway, I haven't practiced for a while. So as soon as you, with an hour's practice, you can start doing it. So that would mean he would never have to go to a two-handed keyboard. With one hand on the key set and one hand on the mouse, you could do everything. He does not have a visual sense. When I told him about my floating world system, which I hope we have time for, he said, yes, but what's the interface? I said, Doug, that is the interface. And he didn't get it because to him, an interface is typing in characters specifying commands. So there are a lot of culture issues, but share one view, and that is that the present computer world is absolutely lousy. But I want everyone here to understand the brilliance and depth. So at the bottom, his agenda, and I've tried to highlight agendas here with a star. His dream is that teams can build their own software tool. Teams which can build their own software tools will vault human collaborative ability to unprecedented heights. He calls this the evolution. And he's famous for the phrase, the augmentation of intellect. He's just got a prize for something called the hyperscope. I don't know what level of it's in, but his notion of the hyperscope is that it will open all documents and link to them. So it will be very powerful if possible. Now, jumping right on to what the most important thing, I've got stuff on Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and whatnot, but I'll skip that. So, today's computer cosmology, how did we get it? People think it sprang from the brow of Zeus. Not at all. It sprang from a bunch of guys also in the outskirts of Stanford, California, of Palo Alto, California. Xerox Palo Alto Research Institute. Now, let me give you a quick rundown on the history of Xerox and PARC. So Xerox, I fell for Xerox propaganda the first time in 1952 when I was a kid, or 53. I bought something called the Inventor's Handbook, and it said that an inventor named Chester Carlson had invented a wonderful new copier that will use electrostatic charge to make it possible to make paper copies for as little as 10 cents a sheet. And this was being developed by the Haloid Corporation. Well, I don't think they said developed, and I fell for it. So I started calling copying firms in Manhattan, where I lived, saying, do you have the new Haloid copier? Huh? Copies cost $1.50 each. We have to make it paper internegative. Okay. It was not until 10 years later that Haloid changed its name to Xerox and brought out its first electrostatic copier, the Model 914, which caught on like a wildfire. No one in the world, least of all its developers, had expected. And they had a tax. Xerox actually taxed every copy made, meaning that when you signed the Xerox licensing agreement for the 914, you were paying something like a penny a copy, additional to your monthly charge. So they essentially had a license to kill. And until their patents ran out, they were a Niagara of money they did not expect. And they were arrogant past description. So they bought Scientific Data Systems, a small company, and they rechristened it Xerox Data Systems, and they said, we're going to compete with IBM across the board, and they created new departments with the names of every department in IBM. But it took more than that. And they weren't ready for that, and that cratered, and Xerox Data Systems went down the tube. And so they became wary of computers about which they knew nothing, whatever. Meantime, a very smart guy named Bob Taylor, who had been the head of advanced research projects at the Pentagon, and who had backed Doug, persuaded them to build a research center as far away from Xerox corporate headquarters as possible. The Xerox corporate headquarters being in Connecticut, they built it in California. And so they gathered there what were claimed to be the best and the brightest. Alan Kay, who made ceaseless speeches about it, kept saying how the top 10% of computer science was at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, this being an extreme annoyance to those of us who also thought we were pretty good and who were not there. Now, there was a hidden agenda at Xerox PARC, perhaps not articulated, because they wouldn't have put it in these terms. But the hidden agenda was to imitate paper. To imitate paper on the screen. allow you to edit documents precisely as they would print out, and save them. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing really. But those of us who asked a decade earlier, how do we improve on paper and how do we create a paperless world, find fault with it in that it is a digression. It takes you in the wrong direction. If you're going to try to create a paperless world, don't imitate paper, because then you're down the road of saving things that look like paper. If you're going to go to paperlessness, you have to make very rapidly changing links of thousands of kinds in an entirely different universe. This is my position. Okay. So this chart I've just given you is just a summary of the various aspects of how we got where we are based upon the PUI. The PUI is my term for that structure which all computers have today. Specifically paper simulation, the clipboard, Xerox PARC windowing, not the other, there were other kinds, mouse, icons, applications as we know them, and the never questioned hierarchy structure. Where to start? Paper simulation, rather than loose text pieces, free text, flowable text, and rather than hypertext, with no zooming. When a document opens, it's one size. It's one size. You can get a, quote, preview, but that's a special case. Why not zooming? I mean, with today's graphic boards, you can zoom. We'll get back to that, I hope. Okay, so they didn't, partly because, well, anyway. No interconnection between the documents. Key. Ultra-traditional concerns. Point size. Point size. Now, when typography was done in terms of, with actual physical lead, you had to have specific point sizes. But what in the world is the point of point sizes when you get to, even to paper simulation? Wouldn't you like to be able to zoom to increase the size of a paper document just by 17% and have each font expand correspondingly? No! Because what happens if you go 17%, which of the fonts jump up to the next size of the size after that and which don't is entirely a matter of luck and what's installed on your computer. Good God. Now finally, the internal structure is that fonts are represented by so-called by internal markup. That is, there are two basic approaches. One is to put the markup on the side. So you have a plain text file and then have a little map over it in a different document, in a different file or another part of the same file, saying this part gets big, this part gets small. This has a number of advantages, one being that you can have a number of different markups of the same thing. Also, it's much more readable. You can look at the text file and read it. But no, they decided on this, on the embedded markup model. It was already arriving probably from the Rocapi project in Pennsauken, New Jersey. I was just reading last night the autobiography of John Siebold, who was the pioneer of text graphics, and I think I came to the paragraph where he invented embedded markup, but it's not entirely clear from it. So all of this became part of the structure of the world as they saw it at Xerox PARC. They built their own machines at Xerox PARC. First they bought Novas and a PDP-10, but Xerox Corporate didn't like the idea of their buying computers, so they had to build their own. So they built various things, and then they came up with the Alto. Now this was at a time when no one could afford this kind of graphics. Screen graphics could not be afforded. They had little computers at the time, but basically they had character-generated displays. And I forget which was standard. And so they made the huge breakthrough saying everybody here gets a computer with screen graphics. And this happened over a period of time, but it was an enormous breakthrough and one of the reasons we envied these people so much back then. But what they did with it was the imitation of paper. Now there were three key text projects. I'm ashamed to see I left out the third. Polos, Bravo, and if you'll write Interpress underneath that completes it. So Polos was an endeavor to completely rebuild Doug Engelbart's system, but with each user having their own Nova computer and a very intricate intricate switching network. A fellow named Larry Tesler, also a friend of mine, but very much disliking Doug's interface, said we can't use this absurd interface. We've got to have it look easier to use. And the slogan there at Park was called modelessness. This was the big slogan then. I won't get into it, but basically it means you don't go into separate modes. Things always look the same. And the reason they did this was that the Bravo text editor, or one of the reasons, the Bravo text editor in its first incarnation had two modes, the editing mode and the control mode. And because it was designed by very bright techies, but techies who'd had no sense of a user, it was very easy to destroy things. And the most humorous example was if you typed EDIT into at the wrong time into Bravo, E would select everything, D would then delete everything, I would then insert the following character, and T would insert the letter T. So if you type edit, whatever you had would be replaced by the letter T. Okay, so Bravo was managed by Chuck Simoni, a very bright young lad. And with Larry Tesler's help, they put on features that made it begin to look like today's text editing with striping, I believe, and insertion and default insertion. Now, I had default insertion in the editor I designed 4 years early, but never mind. The Bravo project, when it all designed, Interpress then was a system which would convert between different editing systems and put out to different printers. And Xerox management said, oh, that's a great idea, but we won't release it until we have it for our entire product line. And since that looked like years away, John Warnock quit and founded Adobe. And so Interpress became first the PostScript language and then Adobe Acrobat. The PostScript language, by the way, was based upon Chuck, first name is Chuck Moore, I think. Anyway, Chuck's language for astronomy called Forth. So people say, use a thing for what it's designed for. Nonsense. The Forth language was great for a lot of things. And of all people, Captain Crunch, I won't get to him, but he was the famous blue boxer who instructed Jobs and Wozniak. Captain Crunch brought Forth into the Apple for editing text. And from there, John Warnock created the Interpress language, Interpress, which is and PostScript, which is the Forth language with extensions. And so the PostScript language could then be put inside printers. So we're in the paradoxical situation that for a time, the Apple printers had more processing power than the computers they were attached to. So if you really wanted to get something done, you sent a program in PostScript written to do number crunching. I won't get through much more. The clipboard. Okay. Okay. So anyway, how we got to where we are. Simoni took Bravo to Microsoft, and it became Microsoft Word. So if you try to look inside the Microsoft Word file, you will see the Bravo save format, just as the way it was at Xerox Park 20 years ago. That's my understanding. And Interpress became the monolith known as Adobe. Okay. Now we get to the part that ticks me off the most. The so-called clipboard. I think I have something on this machine to demonstrate the issue. How do we get on this machine to the desktop? No. Oh, right. I turned it off because I freeze, but I can do it. Right.
Right click on
No, I'm trying to find, what am I trying to find?
the desktop.
No, C drive, that's it.
Run.
My computer is where?
Just run. Run.
Oh,
There you go.
okay. Yeah. That's a semicolon. This way lies madness. I don't do this stuff. Okay. Oh, the TED file's deleted. Okay. So I'll switch computers. How do I get this back on, Arthur?
Tap it once.
Okay. So here. So what did cut and paste mean? Well, I was told at the age of 14 when I was learning to write that writing is mostly rewriting and rewriting is mostly rearrangement. And the technique used for this is cut and paste. Take your first draft and you take a pair of scissors. And now you cut it up and you have a number of pieces. If they overflow the desk, they go to the floor. And now you find the right order. And you add whatever content, and you paste it together, you add whatever content, then you retype it and go through the process repeatedly. Tolstoy called this his noodles. He would dictate to two daughters. One version was kept for reference, and the other was cut off and put all over his dacha Yasnaya Polyana, and he would go into the woods and call back as he would enter the woods, "Don't touch my noodles." So this was an honorable method used by everybody, and here, for example, let's take it further back. Oh, I was going to drop it in the other. Man, no drag and drop there. Okay. So 1680. Sorry. Laptop. Oh. Function F5. Yeah. Blaise Pascal, 1680. Pensée, a most redoubtable work. You can see where he cut and where he pasted. Similarly, Flaubert, L'éducation sentimentale. Now here it's not literal cut and paste, but arrows connecting the content so the author can successively see the various stages of what he's working with. Victor Hugo, Les Misérables. Same technique. And for the grand finale, Victor Hugo, L'Homme qui rit. True cut and paste. Now, in 1980, so what happened with Xerox PARC and all? Well, where to go now? Oh, I'm sorry. We can leave it there. What happened at Xerox PARC in this document is that they changed the meaning of cut and paste. They created a buffer that would hold one item, only one item. And instead of calling this the abominable hidey-ho, which I would call it, they called it the clipboard. And the operation of hiding something they called cut. And the operation of spitting it back out in some arbitrary place they called paste. And they fooled people into thinking this was the same thing that they'd had before. And it was not. They took away the tool and renamed it. Now, this first was exposed to the public in a machine called the Macintosh in 1984. And I think it is no coincidence somehow that it took place in that Orwellian year. What did Orwell say? He said that if you change the meaning of the word, people will forget. And so we don't have people demanding proper writing tools that allow this kind of deep rearrangement. You have only this one-step rearrangement where you've got to remember where the thing is and where it came from. Yes, I know people are very proud of their ability to use it. Screw that. I want the real stuff. Take what you have what you like, but it shouldn't. But we should have better tools. Okay, so now windowing. Now the windows of today have three conditions. You see that if I hit the this one, it goes down there, and I'll bring it back up, and oh, sorry, wrong one. And if I hit the full screen, it goes to full screen. And then it has this intermediate one, which is a size set by the user. This was a decision made by Xerox PARC. A window has three sizes. Now, the other competing windowing systems of the early 1970s, such as those in Carnegie Mellon, had a tiling option, which would say, now put all of these in a rectangular tiling system. There are many ways of prioritizing them, but Xerox simply simplified it to that, and that is how it's become standardized. What alternative kinds of windows are there? Well, for example, there was News or Newis, which was developed at Sun, where they were actually going to have the window be in so-called display postscript language, so it would be able to do all kinds of things in the window itself. This was a nice example of a political fight. It was James Gosling at Sun who later developed the Java language. So he was bloodied on his losing fight over display postscript as an alternative to the windowing. The windowing, as we saw it, first appeared, as I said, in 1984. All of these things on this page came out in the Macintosh first. The reason was that Xerox couldn't sell them. First they built the Alto, which everybody at Xerox PARC used, and then they tried to productize it in this product called the Sun, the Star, the Xerox Star. And the Xerox Star was basically an $80,000 tool for secretaries. Now, no boss, for macho reasons, could possibly give his secretary an $80,000 tool. So it was doomed. So they called in Steve Jobs, and Jobs said, hell, I can sell this. He built the he built the Lisa, which was a flop, and then he built the Macintosh, which he pared to the minimum you could get, the 128K Macintosh. Tiny window if you look at it now, but it had all those fonts which seduced people, and a number of other features, and it had the mouse which people loved. And that was how all of these things were revealed to the public. Xerox, I am told, put some money into Apple at this time, but this is not widely known, and I have to check it. A few other points here. The mouse was, of course, adopted from Engelbart. Somehow Xerox PARC has gotten credit for it in a number of places. But they threw out the key set, of course. The icons, the iconic system adopted by PARC, they're all the same size. Have you noticed? You're able to customize them somewhat on some of the Macintosh versions, and you're able to change the color on some things, but you don't have, and you can create your own with difficulty. But you can't have big icons and little icons, for example.
Do you want a time check, Ted?
Yes. Well, okay. Right.
10 minutes till. I just want to make sure there's time for discussion.
Right. Well, it's still 12. This is till 1:15, right? Including discussion. Okay. So I'll just go to one other. So applications. Now, who invented the application? Well, the term was used earlier, before the Macintosh. I remember when Dave Ahl, my boss at Creative Computing, started talking about applications. I said, "What's an application?" And he started fumblingly explaining. I said, "Oh, I get it. An application is a program that's separate from other programs." You see, you can have what is so-called integrated software, where these things are not separated. But the application as we knew it was created by Steve Jobs when he brought out the Macintosh, essentially he would sell creator codes to different corporations. So if you bought into the Macintosh as a software developer, whether you were Adobe or Cricut, I think Cricut's long gone, you bought a creator code. Now, any data made with your application could only be opened by that application. So it was a devil's bargain, you see. Not only were the applications kept separate, but they were indissolubly separate, except as their information could be passed back and forth through the clipboard. So this was that has now been relinquished, but still on some machines, I believe on Windows Mobile now, you still have to buy in, and some systems you still do. Hierarchy. Well, you see, hierarchy has never been questioned here. Except by a few of us. Hierarchy has been used for the organization of files since something like 1945, when somebody said, we don't know who, where should we put all these files? And the answer came, let's create a file with the names of all those files. And thus was born the first hierarchical directory. So, computer basics, hierarchical directories, paper simulation, the clipboard, windowing, the mouse, icons, and applications. All of these are built into computers, right? Lies! They're all lies. These are the present conventions. These are the present conventions. Obviously, most people aren't going to change right away. As we know from paradigm study, basically, nobody switches. It's just that people die off. And we have nothing on the horizon right now, or rather, we have nothing in being right now. Okay, I'll skip Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and what the hell? I'll leave those as handouts here, but I will go straight to my own work because naturally, as you may have suspected, I challenge these ideas. So I was always a social and intellectual radical. I wanted not just new forms of education, new forms of university, new forms, especially to destroy the educational system, the lower grade educational system that existed, because agreeing with Buckminster Fuller that the educational system as it is now essentially destroys minds and makes them conventional. Whereas the kind of initiative and fluid thinking people ought to have is is created by entirely different means. I was after a whole lot of different things. And one serious problem was always that because I did not get along very well with people I considered conventional and shallow, and unfortunately most of the people I would have to deal with were, by my feelings of those times, conventional and shallow, there was a huge paradigm gap. Also, only in this century have I started taking lithium, which has considerably reduced my irascibility and agitation, as some perceived it. So my background was really very heavy in media, and I'd produced a long-playing record, directed, anyway, shot a 26-minute student film, and finally, which now is finished, and finally, I believe I wrote the world's first rock musical, which ran as scheduled for 2 nights at Swarthmore College in the fall of 1957. So that's where I was coming from, but I called myself a philosopher and filmmaker. I majored in philosophy, and I believed I could analyze anything, design anything, and show anything. And while I obviously can't substantiate that fully, I don't think I've betrayed it in my work since then. So my second year in graduate school, I took a course in computers and had the epiphany of a notion of a worldwide hypertext publishing, anarchic hypertext publishing. I'd always thought publishers were pompous and stuffy, and the way education was pompous and stuffy, and the way to liberate this was to allow everybody access to a printing press, but the only way to do that would be electronically. And later I worked for Bill Yovanovitch at Harcourt, Brace and World, as it was called at that time, and now it's called Harcourt, Brace, Yovanovitch. And he said, "Oh, but most people don't want to publish." I said, "Everybody wants to publish," and I believe I was right. So, but the notion, when I would tell people in the 60s that, soon we'll have personal computers and we'll be reading and writing on computer screens. And so we'll be able to have new genre of writing which are non-sequential and parallel, and we'll be able to do it with automatic royalty to every author that contributes, so you'll be able to quote anything directly. Generally there'd be a long pause and they would say, "Is it like a tape?" And for years, that just floored me. I didn't realize the proper Negroponte reply would have been, "Yes, it's like a tape. It's exactly like a tape." It'd be just like the best tape you ever saw. So for the last 45 years, I've been trying to realize this design vision in the same way Doug has, but stressing data structure, because what is needed is a way to manage vast interconnections, the idea that a document can have thousands of links piled high and can quote from all sources and also pay the rights holders. And this was always part of the model because copyright was not going to go away. Even if you say that more and more people are going to steal things, well, they told that to Steve Jobs, and yet he puts out the iPod and makes millions and millions of dollars. I'm not trying to make millions of dollars here. I'm just trying to create an environment where everything can be legally remixed by anyone. So that the Xanadu model, which is now called transliterature, means that because it's referential or indirect, you create pointers to all the things you want to include in your document, and they are brought in from their respective publishers with payment if necessary. So I'm still trying to pull this together. Transliterature appeared. Transliterature I just rolled out publicly on the 24th of October, and it had a brief flurry on Slashdot. So here's transliterature.org. And this is the long. There's a long rollout essay, which was somewhat, shall we say, confrontative. So this is the legacy today of the. This is the legacy of the Xanadu project with the same. The pictures are gradually coming in. The same data structure, but greatly simplified from the Xanadu 88 model, which we did not finish in the miseries of the Autodesk captivity of 1988 to 92. I could get into that, but I won't. So what I'm working on now is that, and transcopyright, which is the copyright doctrine, which makes all of this legal. And the problem is, it's orthogonal to what other people are thinking about. They're looking at it sideways, and so they can't see it. Sorry. Now, because of the quirks of Explorer, I have to type the whole thing in again correctly. Okay. So the point is that the open source people and the Creative Commons people are looking at other things, but not considering this so much. Although Larry Lessig has said he will work with me on developing a polished Creative Commons transcopyright license. So basically, the transcopyright license is simply that the content can be reused virtually. You give permission for any portions of it to be brought in, provided it's always brought from your server by somebody else's citation. So whether this will fly, who knows? It's all so much more a matter of fad than technical feasibility. That, if anything, is what I'd like to close with. That fad rather than feasibility is very much the issue. And the accidents by which we have gotten to the present computer world are not to be taken as any kind of technological determinism. I believe today's computer world is as determinate as Britney Spears and the SUV. You know, just what's happened to be around now for a wide variety of accidental reasons. Okay, thanks. Stephen.
I mean, I think you're undoubtedly right and make a really useful set of points about technological determinism. But going right back, Ted, to the beginning of what you were saying, it seems to me that you are hanging on to two extremely fragile and repeatedly failing notions of alternative ideology, one of which is that one can do without the market, and the other of which is the notion of libertarianism. And all of the three examples, each of the three examples, I'm not talking about your later development of your argument, but right at the start, when you talk about the nature of the history of technology, is based upon the assumption that and it might be right in many respects, that the market is a conspiracy against good ideas, that good ideas essentially fail because they don't meet business plans that conform to making profit. And secondly, that there is a notion of freedom that is being constrained by regulation and standardization that is somehow against intellectual development and even the civilizing process. And my observation at this stage is not that you're wrong about either of those, but that they are two extremely weak and fragile and constantly failing positions to take. One, that one can transcend the market. Two, that one can create a libertarian approach to the regulation of human affairs.
Well, first of all, as to transcending the market, that's the argument made by anybody against any new invention, is that it is against the market until we see what it requires. Now, there's a slogan I learned only in this century, which is early adopters never switch. And that's why Doug and I are going to stick to our guns till we die. But since the market has never had a chance at what I'm talking about, nor has it had a chance at what he's talking about. Well, arguably, since timeshare offered it, maybe it did. This is one reason that I don't see this relevant. Now, the libertarian argument, I'm not sure I understand. Could you expound, some of those examples?
Well, I mean, taking your first example about electricity.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, I agree on that, that I can't see how you could possibly make a market model out of it.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
But you were presenting it, you were giving credit for the good idea.
Yeah.
In terms of this would have worked if only there wouldn't have been a market. And my argument is, yeah, that's right. There are a lot of things that would work if only there wasn't a law of gravity.
No, I think we agree on that one.
But it's there. But my argument at the libertarian perspective is that I would argue that the cost of standardization and regulation is worthwhile for the greater good of civilization. And you might call that a stuttering superficial argument.
But not everything is standardized.
No, not everything is standardized, but it seems to me that there are types of structure and commonly used public good type structures are probably of this kind that need elements of standardization and regulation that run against the sort of spirit of the libertarian outlook that is very good for art, but simply not good for mass consumption and mass production.
Well, that may be a general point. I try to work.
It is a general point.
Yeah, I try to work within constraints of possibility. For example, I proposed, I don't know if it's been published or not, because someone asked me for a chapter for a book, but as sometimes happens, you send it and they never reply. I proposed a new kind of school, which of course has to be in California, where you can get your diploma if you pass tests, and you can have essentially choose the things to be tested on. And you can be tested in any hour of the day or night at Kinko's, which is a large chain that's open 24 hours a day, and essentially all the educational institution does is offer you alternative resources so you can choose your own preferred mode of learning. Now that's entirely legal and would, if carried out, give a high school diploma, which would be entirely legal. It might not be, what's the word, authenticated, approved by, what's the word for educational approval? Anyway, most colleges would recognize it if you applied to them, so that's free. All I'm saying is that you can work outside the system.
But just one final point, isn't it the case that there are two ways that you can explain this failure to take up good ideas? One is that people are kind of a bit stupid and unimaginative, and I think that's the explanation I'm hearing from you. And the other is that there is something about the take-up of big ideas in mass societies dominated by markets, regulations, and all of the other rather tedious things we have to contend with, which mean that there are certain kind of imaginative ideas that are never going to be taken up except as peripheral eccentricities.
Well, unless they can be properly packaged and marketed. Now, you may have mistaken what I said. I wasn't saying that Tesla was right, or that anyway, I wasn't saying Tesla was right, or that necessarily that Doug is right in his designs. I was expressing admiration for the men and explaining their agendas and challenges. On the other hand, I'm right. Yeah, you're right.
Ted,
Sorry, okay.
have you done?
Yorick behind you and then you.
Oh, sorry?
Yorick behind you.
Oh, all right, yeah.
And-
Okay,
Two
yeah.
things quickly. One's along the line of Stephen's that I think in some ways you don't like this. You're more like the techies you don't like. I mean, when you offer to us things we ought to like as better, I don't immediately react positively. I think, well, maybe I like the other one more. And it seems to me the people you're leaving out of this are all the sort of interface psychologists who actually test what people like. I mean, when you were describing Xerox, you talked about them wanting the screen to look like paper. Well, I call that's what I think of as WYSIWYG.
Yeah.
Now, I spent years on pre-WYSIWYG editors where things had line numbers, and I like WYSIWYG editors, and I'm not so sure I ought to like anything else.
Well,
and the second thing, the second point different from Stevens is this. I really disagree fundamentally, I realise, about your point about techies dominating it because they won't listen to what they're told. See, I think it's very often, not always, not in your case, it's very often the absolute reverse. It's that people have ideas, and it's only when the techies program it that it becomes precise, and that's what it means. And the shock to the idea people is they didn't know what they meant until someone showed them. Here's an example that proves it. Look at the great failures of vast software projects from the tax system to the GP PC on you. The general practitioners, the NHS system of putting things on desks of doctors. These are all relative failures. Why? I tell you why. It's not because the techies. It's because the guys who say what they want don't know what they want.
All right, let me reply to those both of them. First of all, I do happen to believe in the great designer theory. My heroes in boyhood included Buckminster Fuller, Frank Lloyd Wright, Orson Welles, and Le Corbusier. So I believe that the buildings of Frank Lloyd Wright, when you enter them, cast a magical spell that is, in fact, the result of the extraordinary vision and sense of proportion that they have. Similarly for Orson Welles, my greatest hero, who essentially at 25 went from being the master of radio, one of the two masters of radio in the 30s, the other being Adolf Hitler, went from being the master of American radio to Hollywood, never having been directed and made a film, or having made one film as a kid. As secretary, created a scrapbook of effects, and then he proceeded to, at the age of 25, reinvent the cinema. So the first film he made became a classic, which is shown to all beginners in film school. And you can recognize an Orson Welles thing. I was turning the dials on a set once, and I came upon a riveting scene, and I don't know why it was riveting, and yes, it was an Orson film. And so, so now, speaking from Hitchcock did not need to look through the lens. This is a very rare talent. He actually knew the perspective and the way the shot would look. Speaking personally, I generally know exactly how my software will feel before it is implemented, and I just got back from Nottingham where I spent hours arguing with guys about how it should be. In the classic example, I designed a system called Jot, a name which has been stolen, a word processor with some very unusual features. This was 1970, and I presented, written in the language I called lollipop notation, which was a state language, and explained to the programmers in the second implementation. I said to Post and Miller, even though it had never been implemented, I said, this is going to feel creamy smooth to use. And Post says to Miller, well, Ted's got some ideas, but we better fix them. Miller says to Post, I know him better than you do, let's do it his way first. They did it, and neither one of them understands to this day why it's creamy smooth to use. And both of them have written on this topic, which I haven't posted yet. So the point is that because I worked backward with my eyes closed from how it should feel with each keystroke, I knew how it would feel. And the same for my zigzag system. I knew how it would be when built. And the floating world text system, this segues over to WYSIWYG. The text system I'm now building, based upon the zigzag structure, will have three-dimensional documents flying in three-dimensional space. Without changing the scene, you'll be able to fly around it using today's high-power graphics boards. But secondly, you'll be able to turn on beams of interconnection among all the documents you see. How many documents you can have open will depend on the size of your machine. But basically, it's an entirely different approach, and everything will be in OpenGL for smoothness. So it's not that I don't believe in simplicity and clarity, which I absolutely do, but rather that the WYSIWYG approach, as Xerox PARC created it, focusing entirely on paper, diverted us from what I think of as the great agenda of paperlessness, which I'm still working toward. So in the floating world graphic structure, you will be able to add to your scene however many documents you want, subtract, make some of them transparent, make them go away, but in principle, on a big enough machine, everything you've ever written can be hanging in the room, and you can have bridges of link, and everything document that concerns you, bridges of link and transclusion among them all. So that is so that's the alternative, not to go to a line-based editor, which is the old-fashioned issue.
Yeah. If I could pick up on that point, when you're talking about your new system and what you want to do about it, you're ignoring one of the characteristics of previous publishing in whatever form, which is that it was always geared for a variety of reasons to what one might call a sequential output, a linear output. And you're still talking about very innovative ways of finally creating a document, if I put that in place, which is read or viewed sequentially.
No. In the general case of text is hypertext, meaning any form of writing with any system of detection. And the general form of a document is any piece of writing with any system of detection. If there are sequential portions, you'll be able to zoom on them. But being able to see several at once simultaneously means that they are simultaneously present, and therefore that the document is not sequential, but the document is a simultaneous presentation. Now, you spoke before of the objective always being sequential. I dispute that. In that, even within the sequential publishing mechanisms we were restricted to with paper, there were marginal glosses. There were parallel texts. I think particularly of the Interpreter's Bible, which I believe had numerous Bibles in side-by-side columns. So there have been numerous departures from sequentiality. My favorite when I was a boy was called the histomap, which, as I recall, it basically showed I don't remember the exact layout, but it showed 5,000 years of history in all the different parts of the world. And so it was not a sequential document, regardless of the fact that it may have been put out as a timeline. It could have been laid out differently if there were different output methods available. So I'm trying to expand on that to give you arbitrary structures of any type you could design. Now it may be that without artificial intelligence, I'm anti-AI, but without artificial intelligence, any document you can design that comes from the human mind. Bob, sorry.
Right. Well, Ted, I agree with you on so many things, but I do disagree with you. I'm coming back to Yorick here with your slagging off the techies.
Only some of them.
Only some. Oh, some of them are true arseholes. It's true, especially the higher paid ones. But you take any bit of kit you like, and there's a human tragedy story behind that. Not just among the programmers who programmed the kit, but also among the young Chinese women who assembled it, living in barracks in Guangdong province somewhere, earning $1 a day. Is that the average wage in China now? When Dell says if they ask for more wages, we'll just move deeper into China. They say inventory has the shelf life of lettuce. Of salad, I think was the word the guy used. Well, we know that. The kit you've got there is, the shelf life of a banana in a supermarket is it lengthens, doesn't it? They grow special bananas that have got a good shelf life for the supermarket. At the same time, the shelf life of a computer is coming down to meet it. So it all serves the needs of the.
Buy a computer if they put in the chip on the day of the sale in order to get the best price out.
Well, the whole thing is geared for the needs of the market, what is this bloody market, and why do we bloody well put up with it? In a market-dominated world, it occurred to me, you have to be a genius to have a chance of getting an idea out into the world. And not only that, even as a genius, you've got the largest chance that you'll end up being a tortured genius, because you'll know exactly what you could do, and the world just won't let you do it because there isn't a bloody business model to allow it. Now, there is no business model for raising a child. There is no business model for entertaining your friends. Of course, you can't.
Some economists have talked about the benefits of raising a child.
Well, yes, that's right. They do, don't they? If you read that sort of stuff, if you read Malthus and all that, then they condemn the system out of their own mouths. I think that the system relies every step that the system that a market system takes is supported. It's kind of nursemaid every step of the way by good people who want to do good stuff, and the market is the target you should be attacking, not the unfortunate techies.
Because I agree that there appears to be a rapacious side of big capitalism now that didn't used to be so evident. but there's a market everywhere, and you're trying to eliminate all markets. You're trying to create a new socialism and everything.
Yes.
But on all and with regard to everything from footgear to paintings to
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Come on.
We're a grown-up race. We should be able to decide things for ourselves.
I learned to limit my objectives late in life.
So this has been a fascinating pair of presentations. I'm still thinking through so much of what I heard, and I know we all are. It is a juxtaposition of some of the things that David showed us, the simplicity of some of these interfaces, where instead of worrying about a big search form, just type in some tags and away you go. But also the idea that we can become prisoner to these local maxima that are so far below the actual pinnacle that the leaders among us have the vision to see we can reach. And there's a wonderful medium being the message.
If you'll tell me who I'm leading, I'd be happy to find out.
Well, I was going to say a wonderful way in which the medium resembles the message as, you're figuring out how to alt-tab from one thing to another on the Windows box, or the Crestron box, even worse. And we all experience that. I mean, there's got to be something better than cut and paste out there, and I hope that just next Tuesday, suddenly we'll see it. And anyway, to just say thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you.